Hi, this is Laurel at Tara Farm and Nursery and the Refuge Permaculture Center. We're doing a few little videos to talk about food forests and plants and where to put them and what kind to put in. This is in what I call the Refuge Garden, and I'm out here doing the watering this morning. But what I wanted to focus on for the moment in this little clip is the elderberry. I have people ask all the time, where should I plant my elderberry? And this one, as you can see, is very happy. It's covered in blooms. We had a very dry spring, so it's reacting to the need to procreate. Stress hormones bring out root growth and flowers and fruit. So as you can see, this elderberry is protected from southwest winds by very loud geese, but by an old lilac that I keep pruned properly. So the elderberry has plenty of sunlight, but the wind and really intense afternoon sun, it's protected from by the lilac. This is the kind of place that you want to put an elderberry, where it gets some sunlight for about half the day and then is protected from really harsh elements. The other thing about being where it is at the back of the goose and duck shelters is that in the winter it's also protected from really harsh north, cold, dry winds, and from the southwest again by any harsh cold winds that would come that way. And I'm really praying the grasshoppers are going to behave themselves this year. You can see this thing is just covered in flowers, and that actually translates to several pounds of elderberries if we're lucky enough to keep it going. You can see there are little flies all over these. So in this case, there's little tiny flies. You can barely see them. But in this case, it's not honeybees that are pollinating this. It's all these little tiny, tiny flies. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope we have a low grasshopper year. Again, this is where and how to plant the elderberry. Also, the shade here allows for retention of moisture without a lot of mulch. And this plant is probably 7 or 8 years old now. See you in a bit. Here's another example in the Refuge Garden of tiers or food forest idea. What we're looking at here is a mixture of lilac and chokecherry. Keep these pruned up at the bottom as much as possible to give it sort of a canopy. You can see that we're having a really good year for chokecherry. And again, I'm just praying that the grasshoppers behave themselves, because every one of my chokecherry trees is just covered with cherries this year. Again, that dry spring didn't hurt anything as far as fruit production goes. In fact, it encouraged it. Underneath the lilac and the chokecherry, which bloom almost at the same time and put out the most amazing fragrance in this garden, is my mother vine. This is a valiant grape, descendant of very early wild grapes in North America. You can see very healthy green leaves this year. Why? Less moisture this spring, so not a lot of opportunistic little weird virus bacterial infections that they can get. Beautiful big leaves this year. Some of these grape leaves are big enough to actually stuff for Mediterranean recipes. The flowers of the valiant grape and all grapes are pretty much invisible. You can hardly see them. And if we look down from the top, all you see is leaves. But let's go underneath here. And oh my goodness, look at this. Look at this. Oh my goodness. There they are. The grapes hang down, and the fruit and the vine have developed over and evolved over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, so that the fruit hangs at the bottom. It's not visible from the top. And so the only fruit that here in my garden that actually gets bothered by birds is what can be seen from the top. But all of this underneath, they don't see that. This vine I got 7.5 pounds of grapes off of. She's a good 12, at least 12 years old. And underneath the grape, which unfortunately was devastated last year by the grasshoppers, is a red raspberry. This whole area in here is actually filled with red raspberry roots. But that seemed to be a very special plant for the grasshoppers last year, and they devastated it. It's coming back, and this is an ever-bearing raspberry. It's a hybrid, a Polana hybrid. Oh boy, there's a grasshopper. Oh well, keeping our fingers crossed. So it's ever-bearing, and what that means in Wyoming usually is that it produces a crop from July clear through to October, rather than two separate productions. This year, because these were so completely almost destroyed by the grasshoppers, these will probably put up some flowers, and I may see some fruit towards the end of the second season. But everbearing has two crops, or in areas like this, one long crop. We'll talk about raspberries in another video, and especially the everbearing, they're my favorite. You'll see back here there's another little grape. This grape is actually a riparian grape, very old, one of the original native grapes. By the word riparian, you can tell that this is something that usually grows along creeks and rivers. It likes wet environments. And this side of the garden tends to get a lot of snow drifting, so it gets a lot of water. But this spring didn't get a lot of water. So here we have the tiers, the lilac and chokecherry being the top tier, the grapevine filling in between, and down in the bottom here we have smaller grapevine and red raspberry. So everything here produces something, whether it's habitat or fruit or flowers or shade. And when these are all fully grown back and the grasshoppers have left them alone for a while, this will fill in as a food forest. Over at the end there is another little raspberry plant that's just getting started, and rhubarb. So the rhubarb could also be moved in at the bottom here to fill in some of this extra space. But remember, when you do this, that everything is taking up nutrients and water. So although compacting it sounds like the thing to do, you need to remember how many root systems you have going down here. So be thoughtful about how you put it together. And all my little birds are up here hanging out in these lilacs and chokecherries, and they're my army against grasshoppers. Them and my ducks. So, thanks for joining me today. We've looked at one kind of food forest tier structure, and we'll look at some more, little drier type with more native plants, and we'll take a look at that one in a few days. Thanks for joining me. Chin chin.